Good evening, all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari. So today we'll be going to discuss the newspaper for 23rd of December. So let's start with our discussion. So over here we have all the political news. So that's why we're not covering these pages. So we see that the Gambian panel, it has blamed the Haryana firm for cough syrup deaths. So for us, the important information is that the toxins that are related to these deaths that have been mixed in these cough syrups, what are their names, and you have to find out what are their properties. So the name of the toxins is the diethylene glycol and the ethylene glycol. So your responsibility is to find out more about these. Then Rajya Sabha has given the note to add more communities to the scheduled tribe list of the states of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. So the communities which are known as the Nari Koravan and Kurivikran hill tribes, they are going to be the part of the scheduled tribe list of the state of Tamil Nadu. So here you should be knowing that these belongs to the state of Tamil Nadu, and the Betta Kuruba community, it belongs to the state of Karnataka. Coming to the editorials, so here we are seeing that basically this article is talking about countering terrorism and how we are like different meetings and different forums are happening in order to tackle the problem of the problem of growing terrorism across the world. But are they really, actually leading to something we can say substantial or real? That is not the case, and it is suggesting what are the steps required to deal with this situation. So firstly, we see that the issue of countering terrorism is being talked about worldwide, and which is reflected through the recently held meetings of the United Nations Security Council Counter-Terrorism Committee. Then we also had No Money for Terror conference in India. And then an Interpol conference was conducted in which terrorism figured prominently. So we see that none of this augurs well for the fight against terrorism. We did not see any real outcomes out of these meetings and the forums that were recently conducted. So we see that terrorism, how the conventional terrorism is different from this new age terrorism, how it has evolved, and what are the new things that are coming up in the form of terrorism. So we see that very little seems to have been discussed at these meetings on how to deal with the spate of newer terror groups, that is the groups apart from Al Qaeda and the IS, whose ambit of activities had widened and becomes more widespread. Then there is again no indication that the meetings took stock of the fact that ideology intertwined with the religious extremism had become an even more potent threat than previously. So, a mixing of the ideology with the religious extremism, we can say, is the new age terrorism that we are witnessing. And what are the measures, what are the steps needed in order to curtail their activities? Firstly, we want that the world leaders at one level is not to accept all the declarations of the decline in the levels of terrorism at the face value, and not to treat some terrorists as good or others as bad. So obviously you can't categorize terrorism into good and bad. And the next step is to reactivate the proposal for the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, which was proposed by India in 1990. So we need to revive this and finalize the list of items needed to check terrorism globally. So these are, we can say, certain steps which are required in this direction. Additionally, we need that counter-terrorism agencies the world over, they need to hone their skills and capabilities on how best to counter this new age terrorism. So they need to work more upon their skills and capabilities, polishing of their skills. So that is required, and function in a more coordinated manner. Again, more cooperation is required when it comes to functioning, when it comes to sharing the intelligence and the tactics. Then we need to take stock of the newer patterns of terror, such as enabled terrorism, remote control terrorism, which is violence conceived and guided by controllers, which are sitting thousands mile away. So we need, in this case, we can say coordination between different agencies and different countries, given this new form of terrorism that we are seeing, and it is also being addressed as internet enabled terrorism. So here you get this new thing which we are categorizing terrorism as enabled terrorism, as remote control terrorism, as internet enabled terrorism. So that is the new age terrorism. Then we see that the Russia-Ukraine war is going on, and now we are seeing that US is basically, it is supplying more weapons, it is providing financial and military aid packages to the country of Ukraine. So it is coming out with a new military aid package, which amounts to $1.8 billion, and it is providing many defense equipments to Ukraine, which includes the Patriot missile defense systems, the precision guided missiles. So US is supplying the long range missiles, which are playing an important and major role in the Ukraine's recent battlefield advances. So apart from this, since obviously this is beneficial for the US when it is supplying so much of goods, basically the defense equipments to Ukraine, at the same time, it should push Ukraine to find a solution to the conflict with Russia, because supplying these weapons is not, we can say, a solution which is going to end this war. And for that, both the sides, they need to sit together and talk and discuss things out about the issues that they have. Then we see that the next article that we are going to discuss is focusing upon how we can say the world trade, we can say world trade scenario is changing. Earlier, it was basically promoting more and more free trade, and now we are seeing that major economies, specifically in the US, they are now shifting to protectionism. So that is what we are going to discuss in this article. So let's start. So four separate World Trade Organization panel reports, they have ruled that the tariffs of 25% and 10% on steel and aluminum, respectively, that the United States had imposed during the presidency of Donald Trump, they are inconsistent with the WTO law, because they have been, we can say, they have been put in excess of the limit that was permitted under the WTO law. So that is there, and USA has been held responsible for this by the, we can say, WTO's panel reports. And it also points towards that US is turning away from the free trade and moving towards growing protectionism now. So basically, how do we address, or basically, how do we formally refer to this term of more free trade? Is we call it as neoliberalism. So in this, we basically, after the Second World War, after the post-Cold War period, the US specifically, it promoted more of neoliberalism, and it asked different economies, specifically the developing economies, to open up their economies to free world trade. So that is the meaning of neoliberalism, and how we are seeing now shift from the neoliberal to geo-economic order. So we see that the international economic order today is moving away from the post-Cold War neoliberal order towards a new geo-economic order today. And the basically, under the neoliberalism, we saw that the economic and the security interest, they were relatively independent of each other. So the neoliberalism, it is based on principles such as non-discrimination in the international economic relations and a peaceful settlement of disputes through neutral international courts. Then creation of global institutions such as WTO and plethora of free trade and investment treaties were, we can say, agreed to by different economies back then. And basically, neoliberalism supports free trade. So now we see that the independent economic and security tracks, they have started to converge under this new geo-economic order. So earlier, these two factors were independent of each other, but now they are converging on the same plane. Then US, which always lectures countries such as Russia and China to steadfastly follow international law, is turning its back to the rule-based order. And this will only embolden the other countries to brazenly pursue unilateralism and economic nationalism. So that is how we are seeing the change in the stance by United States. And I hope you are clear with what do we mean by neoliberalism and the new emerging geo-economic order when we talk about the world trade. Then India signs FTAs, that is free trade agreements, and the preferential pacts to promote more exports. So we have signed 13 of them. And when we talk about with which all countries, so we have signed the most recently, we have signed 3 with the governments of Mauritius, the UAE, and Australia. So here in the next article, we'll be talking about what do we mean by the uncontrolled re-entries of satellites. So basically, it is the phenomenon of rocket paths falling back to Earth in unguided fashion once their missions are complete. So that is, in simple words, what do we mean by uncontrolled re-entries of satellites back into the atmosphere of Earth, and how they are basically falling back in an unguided manner. and that is obviously poses a lot of threats to human life and even our environment. So it is an uncontrolled re-entry. The rocket in the basically in the rocket stage simply falls. So its path down is determined by its shape, angle of descent, air currents, and other characteristics. And talking about what are the threats, so it can have an impact on an airliner with debris falling down, and it would produce a catastrophic failure, meaning that all people on board in an airplane, they would be killed. So that is, we can say, one risk to the airlines. Then talking about the recent examples about the uncontrolled re-entry of satellites, we see that examples of parts of Russian rockets in 2018, China's Long March 5V rocket in 2020 and 2022, striking parts of Indonesia, Peru, India, and Ivory Coast, among others. So that is one example. And when we look at the worst offender of this thing, we see that it is USA, that is was the worst offender of such uncontrolled re-entry happening. And if re-entering stages, they still hold fuel, if they still have fuel, and atmospheric and terrestrial chemical contamination is the another risk because of this. And there is no international binding agreement to ensure that rocket stages, they always perform controlled re-entries, nor on the technologies with which to do so. So we do not have anything like this as of now. And the Liability Convention of 1972, it requires countries to pay for damages and not ensure that they are taking steps to prevent such instances. So that is there, and this is missing, and we need to come up with these things that we just talked about. Now we'll be talking about what do the Jammu and Kashmir Land Grants Rules 2022 entail. So basically, you can go through this on your own. We do not have anything, difficult to understand over here or any analysis. So you can go through this highlighted portion on your own. And for the time being, let's move ahead. So here we see a concern over the bar on the higher educational rights for the Afghan women that has been taken by the Taliban government, which is ruling there in Afghanistan. So India has consistently supported the cause of women education in Afghanistan, and we have emphasized the importance of the establishment of an inclusive and representative government that respects the rights of all Afghans and ensures the equal rights of women and girls to participate in all aspects of the Afghan society, including access to higher education. So that is what India believes in and India supports. So India supports women's rights, giving freedom to women, because obviously we treat everyone as equal. And India reminds the Taliban about the UNSC resolution 2593, a resolution that called for upholding of the women's rights. Then talking about India abstaining from the UNSC vote on Myanmar, and we call for quiet and constructive diplomacy. So India, along with Russia and China, we have abstained from this voting. And basically, this resolution is criticizing Myanmar's military regime, and instead we have called for quiet, patient, and constructive diplomacy with the junta government that is ruling there. And this resolution is also demanding an end to the violence and the release of all the political prisoners, including the state chancellor, that is Aung San Suu Kyi. And we believe, basically, India believes that the complex situation in Myanmar, it calls for an approach of quiet and patient diplomacy. So any other course will not help in resolving the long-standing issues which have prevented enduring peace, stability, progress, and democratic governance. So quiet and constructive diplomacy is the desirable recourse for seeking constructive and enduring solutions in Myanmar. In view of these concerns and our firm commitment to the democratic process and the well-being of the people in Myanmar, India has decided to abstain on this resolution. So that is our stance, India's stance when it comes to Myanmar, the situation in Myanmar, and the resolution that we believe in. Then from the business page, the RBI's deputy governor says that we need a taxonomy, a proper classification, a formal classification, and a definition and definitions to avoid greenwashing. So firstly, here you should be clear with the meaning of greenwashing, and we have discussed this in the past also. So going through it once again, greenwashing, it refers to the dishonest practices aimed at duping the people, or in other and simple words, we can say that when the firms and organizations and institutions, they try to make a fool of the people around them about the steps that they are taking in ensuring the protection and the conservation of the environment, but actually they are not doing anything in, we can say, in real sense. They are just, we can say, mind washing. So similarly, on similar lines, we have the term greenwashing. So they are not taking these steps, and hence they are like doing a greenwashing. So we need a formal definition of green finance along with a taxonomy is the need of the hour, and we added that it will enable more precise tracking of the finance flows to the green sectors. So for that, beforehand, we need a proper classification of things, a proper classification of system, and the definitions of each and every term, so that we are clear with that and there is no confusion later. And a taxonomy would be, it would help the banks and the financial institutions in better assessing the climate risk in their loan portfolio, scaling up sustainable finance, and mitigating the risk of greenwashing. Then talking about cutting, so there is one opinion that we can say that, which says or which believes in cutting the China trade ties because of the recent clashes that we had with China. So, but we cannot go ahead with this step because engaging China in a trade war right now at this juncture will mean sacrificing a considerable part of our potential growth. Because the things, the goods that we are importing from China, obviously there is no alternate, or there's no alternative to those goods and services. So that's why we cannot engage into a trade war with China as of now, because obviously that is going to pose a serious risk to our future growth, given already we are basically expecting a slowdown, or we can say recession in the coming years. So that's why we cannot take this step as of now, and obviously that is not a good solution to deal with this situation. Now we'll take up the Mint. So in Mint, basically, we're going to talk about the issue, the border issue between the state of Maharashtra and Karnataka, majorly focused upon the Belagavi region. So this is, we can say, the area of dispute between these two states. And obviously, people are marching, specifically the political parties. So we see that, firstly, we need to understand what is the border dispute all about. So after independent states were reorganized on linguistic basis, so ever since Maharashtra was created on 1st May 1960, it has claimed that 865 villages, including the Belgaum, now we call it as Belgavi, they were where the majority of the people they speak Marathi, they be merged with the state of Maharashtra. So that is the demand of state of Maharashtra, and that is the situation. So we saw latest flare up given there are upcoming elections. So what efforts they have been made to resolve this issue? So in 1966, Maharashtra's insistence, we have a center formed the Justice Meherchand Mahajan Commission to look at the issue and give recommendations. So we see that the commission, it rejected the state's claim over the Belgavi, but it listed 246 villages that should be made part of Maharashtra and 247 to be made a part of the state of Karnataka. However, Maharashtra rejected the recommendations while Karnataka accepted them. So in 2004, Maharashtra took the dispute to the Supreme Court, and right now also the case is sub judice before the Supreme Court. So now, so what is the way forward to this? So the border dispute, it is obviously a politically sensitive issue in both the states, and political parties in Maharashtra, despite their ideological and other differences, they are united in their stand at Belgavi, and other Marathi-speaking villages should become a part of their state. So Karnataka, which is going to polls next year, considers the dispute settled because on the recommendations of the Margin Committee, as the state of Karnataka accepted their recommendations. So under these circumstances, a political solution appears far-fetched, and a legal remedy is the only way out of it. So that was, we can say, we should be obviously knowing about the things that are happening. And so this was all about this issue. And thank you for joining Ansarkari. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, and you will find the PDF link in the description box below. So go through that also. You'll be finding very informative things in the PDF as well. Thank you so much.